So this is my all new mini ITX build I just finished up. This one's got the latest Ryzen 3600 and the GTX 1660 Ti. I also came up with the name for it. I call it the Red Devil. Now if you decide to build this PC yourself, it's going to cost you roughly $700 to $800. It's a lot of stuff I want to show you guys, and we're gonna dive into it right now. A couple of questions here I'm going to answer in this video. Now in case you're not interested in me going over the part selection and you're more interested in seeing how this machine handle games, you find timestamp for that down in the description box. I've tested 7 of the most popular games in both 1080p and 1440p to give you a solid idea what you can expect if you decide to build this yourself. Now every part mentioned in this video can be found down in the description box down below, and with that said, a few things here before we dive into the components. Now if you're looking for the fastest, most badass machine that will give you the absolute highest frame rate possible for the money, I would then suggest you to switch out the CPU to something from Intel. But if you decide to do that, the performance difference is not going to be huge. We're talking a few frames depending on what games we're looking at, and so I can say with full confidence that even though I'm a gamer and I'm only planning on playing games on this machine, I would keep this PC as it is. But I'm going to explain why that is in this video. Now this machine runs every game I've tested at minimum 60 FPS at 1080p, everything maxed out. It even handles many games above the magic 60 FPS mark at 1440p with same level of details, but we're going to dive much deeper into the numbers in just a second. With that said, I want to talk about the part selection, and I want to start with the CPU. So after been running the 3600 through my main gaming rig a couple of times, you guys were blown away and I was blown away, so I want to tip my hat to AMD. I was surprised to say the least when I found out that this $200 CPU can actually compete with Intel's Core i9 9900K, which is a $500 processor in games such as Counter-Strike. This, my friends, is a brilliant CPU altogether. It's a 6-core and 8-threaded part with a max frequency of 4.2, which should be said is an important metric for gaming. Typically high frequency means that the CPU can deliver more FPS in the games you're playing. Now the extra added cache, which AMD refers to as game cache, is also adding more performance to the experience. But yeah, with all that being said, we know for a fact that Intel's Core i5 9400F is a slight bit better choice for pure gaming. We're talking a few frames here and there, but this is something that I want you to understand. The Ryzen, however, is my first choice, not just because it's based on a much newer technology. I would argue that the extra cache and the additional threads makes this a better choice long term. Right, next up we got the RAM, and to match this with the red accents in the H200i, I went with this 8GB kit from Ballistix Sports. Now I made a slight mistake here. I should have went with a 3600 MHz kit, but I ended up picking a slower kit. I was able to overclock these to 3600 anyway. Why do I seem so obsessed with memory RAM speed? It's a good question. The answer is simple. The way that Zen 2 and Ryzen works, we got something called Infinity Fabric that sort of works as the communication bridge between the CPU and the RAM, explained in a very basic way. And yeah, essentially faster RAM up to 3600 can gain performance according to AMD. Now moving on to the graphics card, initially this was a bit tricky. I was contemplating whether to pick the RX 5700 or not. In the end I ended up with the GTX 1660 Ti, more specifically the Ventus XS from MSI, simply because the much better cooler for this current price tag. Now the only downside, it doesn't have a passive or a silent mode, which means that even though your PC is idling, the fans are still going to spin. However, they are very silent, so you're not going to hear them. The Vega 56 would have also been a great choice candidate for this build if it wasn't for the fact that Vega cards are starting to get replaced by Navi. Anyway, for the $269 you're getting excellent performance here. However, something that bothers me a lot is that Nvidia could have given us 8 gigs of RAM instead of 6, but yeah, it is what it is. We're gonna look at benchmark numbers in just a second. As for the storage, I went with this A400 from Kingston. A 240GB is on the lower side, and I would highly recommend you to opt for 5GB here instead. Now to the main board. One of the cool things with Ryzen is that although AMD just dropped their 3rd generation of their processors, motherboard motherboards that were made back in 2017 still support these new CPUs, but it comes with a but. It usually requires that you update the microcode of the motherboard for it to work, and because this is B450, this is usually the case with this motherboard also, but MSI has been on the forefront updating the motherboards to support the 3rd gen Ryzen for several models. Looking at the comments reveal that these new motherboards now have support for Ryzen 3rd gen. Now even though this has support for Ryzen 3rd gen, I highly recommend you guys to update the microcode once you get the system up and running. Now if you have a good eye, you notice that I'm demonstrating this on a slight bit older B350 from Gigabyte, but in terms of performance there is no difference here. For power, I picked this 500 watt thermal take unit with 80 plus white. 80 plus white offers 80% power efficiency and so less power leakage and simply less heat leaking out of the case. And speaking of which, there's a few things here we also need to mention if you're thinking about building a mini ITX build. Although this isn't the smallest mini ITX case around, it is quite small, and if you compare it to a mid-size case, this case is definitely a bit smaller. Something to be aware of is the limited space, of course. This case, for example, doesn't have the best airflow. As you can see, we got space for two 120mm fans in the front. We got an additional two 120mm fans, one at the top and one at the back, and these are pre-installed and they are included. Obviously, as you can see, because we got a solid front here, airflow is going to be a limitation. There's plenty of expandability here, and in an upcoming video I'm going to attempt to install a water cooler in this case and see how that works, and I cannot wait to record that video. And so if you want to install water coolers in this case, there is enough clearance here for a 240mm radiator to fit in the front, and it's easy to install thanks to the removable bracket. One downside though we need to mention is the air grills, preventing dust getting inside the case. Bottom one is excellent, there's nothing to complain about here, but the top one is not the greatest. Now in order to clean this dust filter properly, you have to untie the screws to get a hold of it, which is a huge bummer. Also, something that you need to be aware of is that the airflow in this case is not the greatest, but all in all this case is a home run in my opinion. The letter I on the end means that this model comes with a pre-installed LED strip, a smart hub and a cam software that lets you fine-tune fan curves and overclock your system with a few clicks. Lately the software's actually got a lot more intuitive thanks to recent updates, and this is now a very powerful tool guide, and it keeps track of noise levels and temperatures all in one single software. And if you're looking for a software like this, I highly recommend to look into the cam software. But yeah, with that said, yeah, let's look at the numbers. I've tested 7 games, and I want to mention that in case you find the GTX 1660 Ti to be a bit too powerful, or if you find it to be a slight bit over your budget, I also decided to throw in benchmark numbers on what you can expect with a RX 590, which is a fantastic 1080p graphics card with 8 gigs of VRAM, and as you can see, for the most part the RX 590 is the king for 1080p, while the GTX 1660 Ti also does 1440p with pretty good damn results. Again guys, you find all the links to each and every PC part down below. I gotta say guys, I'm very happy with this build. Now if you haven't tried mini ITX yet, I highly recommend it. Nowadays I keep my case on the desk and it never feels like it takes up too much space. Thanks to H200i's length, longer graphics card will also fit in here, up to 325mm, and even bigger CPU air towers up to 165mm will fit here just fine. All in all, this $750 to $800 PC is something I can say I'm truly proud about. Now in case you got any questions, please shoot. I'm gonna do my best to help you guys out answering whatever question you may have. With that said, I want to thank you so much for sticking around this long, and yeah, watch either of these two videos for more awesome content. And with that said, you guys have an awesome day, right?